Hello everyone, this is Gaurav from Automation Hacks and welcome to a new video on Java 11 features that make a lot of sense for test automation. So let's get started. So Java 11 brought with it four features that I feel are particularly useful when writing automated tests. Let's go over them one by one. So Java 11 introduced a new HTTP client. This was earlier introduced in Java version 9, but it became part of the standard library in Java 11. Now, how could this be useful? Say you have to write any sort of scripts wherein you need to make an HTTP call. Instead of depending on a library like Rest Assured or something like that, you can write a quick script using this HTTP client. So let's take this in action. Here I have a simple testng test method called as test HTTP client. Now I am basically initializing a client here, right? So notice that I'm using type inference to infer the type of the client. Usually this HTTP client offers a simple builder sort of API. So you can use the new builder to get a handle and then customize the client howsoever you need. Here I have shown a couple of options. So I am defaulting the version of this client to be for HTTP2. There is also other versions that are available in case you want a very specific HTTP version for your API call. And I've given a connect timeout of say 20 seconds. If we go here, connect timeout is a way in which we will check, whether if a new connection is not yet established, it will try for a certain duration. And if it's not able to make a connection, then it will throw back an exception. Pretty useful to make sure you don't have a long running test without any sort of exit out of it. We use the final build method to get a handle to this. Also, notice that I'm having this within the try block. So this is the try with resources feature that we have in Java, wherein like this client that is initialized is going to get auto closed if this block, executes successfully. So this is very useful and helps us avoid writing a close method on our own. The next is actually building the request that you want to build. So similar to the HTTP client, we have an HTTP request, and we again use the new builder just to build our request. So there are two parts to making any request. Here I'm having a very simple get call from Postman. So I'm using the URI.create, giving it an HTTP URL that we can hit, and finally calling build to get a handle to our request. You can, of course, tweak this and add query params, path params, whatever be the need for your specific API. And lastly, we just use the simple client.send method, give it the request, and also provide it a handle to indicate what kind of response I want. So here I essentially want the HTTP response to come back in a string format. uh, I also log it. And lastly, I just assert that the response that is provided, the body of it is not null, just a simple assertion. So let's run this test and we can see the test passes. It also gives us this response, which is exactly what this particular API gives. So there you go. You have a simple HTTP client with Java 11 for whenever you need to make an API call. Now let's take a look at some new string methods that were introduced in Java 11. While you might already be used to it, if you're working with Java 11 or a later version, it's still helpful to call them out and sort of have this in our memory so that whenever we get a use case like this, we know that a method like that already exists. So here I have a simple string, automation hacks, and that has couple of leading and trailing spaces. Uh, I think string dot length requires no introduction. This is already there. But I think there were a couple of methods introduced, like whether the string is blank, um, whether a method to essentially strip the string and check that, the leading and trailing spaces are gone. Similarly, if I'm just interested in stripping the leading part of the string, then I have a strip leading function. If I'm only interested in trailing, I have that as well. And say I want to repeat the string multiple times, I have a simple repeat method. Lastly, I can also count the number of lines within a string by using lines and then follow it up with a count function call. So let's just run this and see how it works. We can see the test executes successfully. And say if we were to change the string a little, uh, is the way to elevate your testing. All right. We can see, of course, our assertions start to fail, which is fine, right? And there you go. There are some simple string methods that you can use when you're working with strings during your automation. All right. So next up, we have a couple of file methods that were introduced with Java 11. And typically, when you're working in automation, you might need to, create some sort of temporary file in your test, read from it, write to it, and finally, like clear it when your test finishes. So here are a couple of methods that Java 11 introduced, which are very useful. So let's take a look at it quickly. Here I have a simple method, which is using the files create temporary directory to create a directory named demo in one of the temporary paths within the system, right? Next, we can use the files dot write string method. And inside that, we can try to basically create a new file in this directory. So I use the files dot create temp file method, give it the temporary directory handle that we had initially, and then provide the file name, essentially giving it, sample, and I want a .txt format, could be something else as well. And I provided some sample text that I want to be written onto that file. So essentially, I create a file and then I also write it. Let's also make sure if you have written something, whether we can read from it. So you can use the read string method and give it a file path. In this case, it's just a path object that it expects. And lastly, we do a check whether the file content that we read is equal to what we had written. Finally, a good practice is to delete any files that you create just to make sure you don't leave around stuff at the end of the test. So I have a delete if exists method. In a real sort of test case, you might actually do want to do it in an after method block to make sure that that block executes even if the test fails. This is just for demo purposes. So let's run this, and this is good. Let's also take a look at it, debug it line by line, just to get a sense of how it's actually working. So you can see, it creates a temporary directory in this path. Uh, then we are able to sort of write to that file. Here you can see I have given a prefix, but it also gives some sort of randomization just to make sure there are no sort of conflicts if you use this method. So in that, it already takes care of securing that method, right? Finally, when we read it, we do get sample text, and the assertion passes. And lastly, we just go ahead with delete. So if we were to actually go and check this file path, whether this file exists, right? So let's say copy value, and let's just say, is this file existing or not? So yeah, clearly there is no such file and directory. So this works perfectly. All right, the fourth feature that I want to talk about in Java 11 is very subtle, but it does add a bit of readability into our code. So Java 11 allowed the capability to do type inference within lambda functions. So if you remember from the previous videos, we had a new keyword called as var, wherein we don't need to specify the type of the variable. And now that feature is also available within lambda functions. So let's just take a simple example. I have a list of some popular programming languages. I have inferred the type again as var. And now say I just want to capitalize these languages into another string. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the Java Streams API. And then I want essentially every item in this stream as we enumerate to get converted to an uppercase, right? So clearly we can use the map function, which is able to take an item from any sort of list iteration and then apply a function on top, right? So prior to Java 11, we would have to specify this as string. But now with Java 11, we can actually just call it var and it will be inferred for us automatically. So I'm taking language and then I'm doing to uppercase. Lastly, I just want to collect that into a single string so it's easy to assert. So I use collectors.joining. Ensure that all of these strings are separated by a comma and a space. And finally, like any good test engineer, I want to assert whatever I've done. Does it match or not? So let's just run this. We can see the test passes. Another way to, of course, write this would be just write string and let's run it. We can see the test passes. So now, essentially, the feature it makes your code slightly more readable. When you know a certain element is of a certain type, Java compiler should also know, and now it does. And that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.